thanks so much, Jenny. It's really lovely to be here, and yeah, lovely to see friends in the audience as well. Thank you for coming along. The theme of tonight's reading is inhabitations, which when it was first suggested, I first read as inhibitions, and it's slightly different. But I've been thinking about both of those things perhaps. So I'm going to read some poems about inhabitations of various sorts. The first one relates to when you go to a National Trust property or any similar kind of country house, there's quite often a room which is known as the King's bedroom. And I'm slightly suspicious of this because I think if you were to add up all the King's bedrooms that are around the country, then there are just far too many for numbers of nights that kings might have been able to spend in them. So I'm going to start with this idea of inhabitation with this poem called The King's Bed. Tradition holds that on a wet, starless night in 1665, the king slept in this bed, or one quite like it. He lay his head, or might have, upon a facsimile of this pillow. And in the morning, that probably fresh, pleasant morning in 1665 or thereabouts, servants, in befitting manner, brought him the sort of breakfast popular in those days, dressed him in the garments that would have been the fashion. What is known is that he was the monarch living in those times, and so slept somewhere. Nearby houses will make their own claims. By reading this, you have brought him to this bed. Another type of inhabitation, and one that I think about quite a lot, is the way that sort of the name of someone can kind of create a character. And I'm quite often drawn to eccentric characters or historical figures. And this poem is inspired by the sort of story of 3 separate shipwrecks in the Menai Strait in the 17th, 18th and 19th century. And in each case, the sole survivor was a man called Hugh Williams. I don't know if this is true. I don't really mind if it is or not, but I've written this poem about this Hugh Williams figure, who is perhaps the same man, sort of reappearing in all these shipwrecks. So this is Williams Who Lived. When this man was hauled from the foam and, shaking, asked his name, the news spread fast. They skimmed him back to shore, a talisman breaking the waves like eggs. Hugh Williams had lived before. The name confounded shipwrecks, made men float through salted depths towards the aching light. Williams was a lonely but a living sort. It seemed the surest way to last gulp air, not water. To die dry was to be him, or if not him, another of his kind. The parish registrars scrawled Williams upon Williams, as though they kept forgetting. Williams married Susan, married Mary, married Anne, and when he died, and died, and died, the headstones read the same, like yesterday's paper. Williams stayed at home and picked rocks from the binary of ploughed earth, or travelled, wrote a book, did or did not like onions, wet the bed. And when he went to sea, as captain, passenger, stowaway, he kept himself to himself, threw the name around him, vein-strung, tenuous as a call. Going over to the United States now, where my sister lives. One time when I was visiting her, we came across this really brilliant building on the border between the US and Canada, which was the Haskell Free Library and Opera House. So on one countryside, it was, I don't remember which way it was, but one side was a library and the other side was an opera house. And I was thinking about this building inhabiting both countries. This poem in 2 parts, and it's called Borderline. 1. Who knows why they built it here? Some grand Victorian joke. We come in by one country and leave by another. Leave fireworks and booze at the door. Even the name is ambivalent. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House suggests the aria shushed from the wings, the book snapped theatrically shut. A ticker tape border bisects the lobby like a sitcom set. The pen on that side of the desk, the paper on this, the practicalities. We lean without touching. The stage is no better. It's in one ear and out the other. We speak our lines from different countries and finish each other's sentences. 2. It's not surprising that the thing burnt down. Nothing personal, a match not spent, an incendiary remark. Dual purpose means there's twice as much to burn. Imagine the ungovernable explosions, the slide of melting glass, the sparks shot from either side into the night they held in common. The fire destroyed the lobby, burned up the lines. Neither party was responsible when it came to claims. Next poem is about a very curious building in Oxford, the Observatory. Is that what it's called? The Radcliffe Observatory. And it was in use as a proper observatory for many years. Those of you who are in your Oxford, I do recommend, if you haven't been, going inside. It's occasionally open and it's a really peculiar building. So I wrote this poem about the observer living there by himself. It's called The Observer. He lives like a bird in a tall nest, an Escher creation of high windows and matchstick stairs. He pushes his telescopes out on the roof for taking the light. He lives alone, the stars are so noisy. He has seen things most people would not even care about. They are too far and too untimely. The plough continues its allotted furrow, and Orion stands perennially fast. He's the watcher of blips, of brevity, and his eye is as quick as a comet. The observer shares his plot with the hospital, where nudes manifest at the windows. He glosses over their magnified exposure and writes notes of complaint to the orderlies. His is a godly life, pressed between two maps like glass slides. The old town, pleasantly abstracted by his height, and its negative, described in stars, at once up close and very far away. I'm going to read a poem about housemates. I was very lucky in Oxford to have some really wonderful housemates, and we collected knickknacks that were made from shells. And one of the saddest things in dismantling that house was getting rid of the shell ornaments. So this is a poem for them. It's called A Shell Family. Mum used to show me how to stack concentric cockle shells to make a crinolined lady, a blank pink cowrie for a face, her whelk breasts small and armoured, her parasol a jaunty conch. Later came the granny-ish collection, a running joke on the mantelpiece. We'd accrue souvenir trinkets whenever we discovered one, an owl crusted with ersatz feathers, a fat ship with sheening mother of pearl sails, the frog family, googly-eyed, conferring in a ring. They were part of the furniture, outrageous tackiness turning eventually invisible. The glitter glue and grubby bow ties didn't register until you really looked at them. And last week, I spotted the little crowd on a glass shelf, priced up for charity, which makes it even worse. Okay, I'm going to share a few slides, a very few, I promise. Okay, first of all, I want to show you this image, which is a baby cage. This was an actual thing. I think mostly in the 1930s, the idea was that babies should get fresh air at all costs. And so people would suspend their children out of their windows, sometimes very high in the sky. So just think about that image, and I'm going to show you the poem that accompanies it that I wrote. Baby cage. Big plans, small flat. Order from the smaller ads. Baby needs some air, dear. Give the kid some atmosphere. I've got just the thing, sweet. Turn her out at 50 feet. Let her loose, but hold the reins. Over traffic, under planes. Watered with geraniums. Baby's all attention, unfurling into cleverness. How's this for togetherness? Day job, growing pains. Out the door and back again. Shoes beneath the cooker. Hat glazed with days of frying fat. Come in late and raise her higher in 6 cube feet of chicken wire. Pigeons rattle overhead. Baby rattles in her bed. Trucks and cyclists mash below. We won't tell. She doesn't know. How'd we ever do without it? Better not to think about it. Okay, and also thinking about inhabitation, the world we live in. This is a silly little poem about the environment, and it's called Conservation Status. Least concern, more than you could shake a stick at. Near threatened, enough for you to shake a stick at. Vulnerable, I wish you would put that stick down. Endangered, can't see the wood for the trees. Critically endangered, what is the sound of a tree falling? Extinct in the wild, what is the sound of no trees falling? Extinct, what is a tree? Now, from a sort of flippant poem about loss, I'm going to shift gears somewhat. So I'm going to read a poem about my mother's death. I apologise if this is perhaps quite sort of heavy, but I was thinking about inhabitation and the way that we inhabit our bodies. So this is called Monument Valley. All that night, I held your hand and watched the blips your life had been reduced to, cyan, magenta, grey. The bleeping displays were self-consciously unhurried, nothing you could call a siren or alarm, though your life depended. It was a vigil of sorts, though I couldn't think of anything much to say, except we love you and they're coming, while the practiced nurse stood mute at the controls. I've never had a slower night nor wished one longer. Your breathing, made regular by the machine, was calm. I watched the screens and didn't understand what it all meant, the little graphs that to my untrained eye resembled canyons, rock formations. Then I had it. Monument Valley, another place you've never been and won't go now, though you talked about it often. Lake Como was another one. Versailles. And I think I'm going to end on some more joyous things. So 2 little poems from In Praise of Hands, which is my collaboration with Naoko. Again, in habitations, I'm thinking about the way hands can create worlds. So this image is called Cat's Cradle, and this is the poem that I wrote to go with it. Fuji, Rushmore, Loughrig Fell. We walked the tops and still can't tell what a mountain really means. We tie knots, trying to explain, though it's well within our grasp. The mountain is green and does not ask. And finally, actually, I'm going to return to my mother, but in a slightly more joyous poem. This is called The Present, and I was really delighted that Naoko created this woodcut to go with my poem, The Present. My mother handed me a gift. Close eyes. I took it in my ready palms. It was lighter than I would have thought. In slipping it from hand to hand, we'd traded more than its small weight. Some ancient magic touched us as it tipped from hers to mine. We changed position, expectation, tense. I'm here and looking at it still. This little thing her clever hands made happen is more precious for the growing space between us, more vital with each passing hour. I watch it closely now. Thank you so much for listening. I just want to finish on this absolutely joyful image by the artist Sally Dodd, who I've been collaborating with on some mossy poems. And so we're thinking about inhabitation of mossy landscapes. So I just thought I'd leave that as a sort of happy place to end on. Yeah, looking forward to the other readings. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you very much, Penny. It's wonderful. Like, what a brilliant set of poems. And as you can tell, when you have time to read through all these responses, you see like we've got really quite a lot of dialogues going on with your work, and also such gorgeous collaborations and new poems as well. Thank you very much for sharing with us. And I'm sure we'll go back to discussing a lot of you know, like the questions and the images that you have raised in these works. So I will now introduce our second reader, Jo Morris Dixon, and Jo is from Birmingham originally, and currently she lives in Oxford. Her poetry has been published in various places, including Oxford Poetry, Poetry Review, Poetry Wales, Ambit, the Signal House, and she was longlisted in Plough Poetry Prize and the National Poetry Competition. Her latest pamphlet is I Told You Everything, out with Verve Poetry Press. So welcome, Jo. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jenny, and thanks for inviting me. And it's so wonderful to read alongside such wonderful poets as well. And of course, thanks all for joining. You might have noticed I'm not very used to doing poetry readings and not really online, but hopefully this will go well. So I'd like to read from my debut poetry pamphlet, I Told You Everything. I actually do art as well. I started painting at the beginning of the pandemic, just as a way to really take a break from the screen. But I really found that it started to really help my poetry process as well. And I feel like a lot of my poems, well, I certainly wouldn't have written a lot of my poems without doing the paintings first, and vice versa. So the picture on my cover is a picture that I painted myself. Okay, so I should say that maybe, as you can tell from I was on the covers of a therapy room, and I told you everything. So my poetry is quite, I think it touches on some quite difficult themes. Helpline. You phoned the helpline at 1400 hours. The croissant you had bought in the morning, now cold in your bag. The shop assistant wondered about you in your ski jacket on such a sunny day. You phoned the helpline at 1500 hours. The dishwasher was full of bacteria growing on utensils. The girl who punched you at school was laughing, but stopped for a moment to bite her nails. You phoned the helpline at 1600 hours. The tap in the kitchen had been dripping in a way which made you think about music. The lifeguard in your local pool was looking for you to check that you weren't holding your breath. You phoned the helpline at 1700 hours. Your period pad was wet and heavy. The teacher who had told you off for going into the girls' toilets was shouting at her daughter for not liking her prom dress. You phoned the helpline at 1800 hours. The voice which answered waited for you to speak before asking if you were in a safe space. The man who had hurt you opened his beer with his teeth because there was no one to tell him not to. Bleach. You remember sitting in your grandparents' kitchen, cold floor, dirty because of their old age lethargy. You can't picture what your little sister was wearing, but she trusted you, upper lip smile, drinking household bleach, utterly harmless if only she had passed it on to her imaginary friend. You remember sitting in your grandparents' kitchen, everything wet and loud, colourful in a bad way, just before you arrived at the hospital, your only sister in a room with a fire exit sign to keep her safe, lying contorted on a bumpy bed, a toy from the Rice Krispies box in your hand. It was her turn to have it. You thought it might make her smile, a terrible consolation. You remember sitting in your grandparents' kitchen, listening to your sister stop laughing. You tried shouting, but the grown-ups were having fun. Finally, you left your sister, hoping her imaginary friend would look after her. You remember sitting in your grandparents' kitchen, trying to focus on the ticking clock, waiting for your sister to get up. "6 p.m. I told you I didn't feel myself. I told you as we walked past the meat counter to choose cat food for cats with problems like ours. I told you my friend has a therapist who listens to them at 6 p.m. every Tuesday. I told you I was more than sad when you found me in bed still on a Friday after school. I told you every time I told you how much I hated it when you cooked without salt. I told you everything. Girl guides. We met on a girl guides trip. She texted first, which caused me to check my phone in French class at school, a different school to the one she was at, which had a pool, but wasn't private. She told me to focus on the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes whenever I felt sad, and that the dress code for her 14th birthday party was red, which meant I expected her to invite me. So when she posted photos of herself and her friends with Smirnoff Ice on MySpace that night, I hid my red turtleneck jumper down the side of my bed and dreamt about her saying sorry and kissing me in a way which made me wake up, shocked to see that she had texted to say, "My friend told me you like me. Is it true?" Tissue box. Before you leant over to pick up your glass, I thought you were going to take a tissue from the box covered in butterflies, the one creature I admitted I didn't like, which made me think of a dream where you carried me wrapped in tissues and left me in an empty swimming pool like an unfinished Cockney painting. Your cliched 6 p.m. client. Tuna melt. The first time it happened felt warm, then cold, then terrifying. The chair you were sitting on in religious education was pale grey, next to a boy who wrote G-A-Y on your school planner in his best bubble writing as you were handing out Bibles at the beginning of class, before your period had flooded your pad and oozed through your 2 pairs of knickers and thick boys' school trousers from M&S onto the seat as the bell rang. The boy stared at you and asked if you had tuna sandwiches in your bag because you smelt like fish, and you lied and said yes, a tuna melt from the canteen, a terrible lie, especially because you had given a speech on animal rights in English just the week before. Existential heart on Skype. I still remember the last time I saw my therapist. It was dark outside because it was 1850, London, March 2020. and we had smiled at the beginning about how she had put a single square of tissue underneath her glass and mine. And when it felt like we were laughing too much, I told her how the virus was everywhere, just like sadness, and asked whether she could really trust me not to have it, or her other clients for that matter. This was back when the general view in the UK was that only people who had travelled from certain countries on Public Health England's list might have it. And she told me that she trusted her clients. And I told her how angry I felt that one time she left her used balls of tissue in front of the water jug we were meant to be sharing, how I suspected she had not gotten the flu jab, which was why she had missed our last session of 2019, and told her she probably would have been hit by a car if it weren't for me telling her that she needed better reflective clothing. She agreed we should meet online from next week instead. I gestured at her plants, so she promised she'd have a plant in her Skype background, as well as a bookshelf and part of a curtain, which was navy blue, just so I'd know what to expect. I told her that I probably wouldn't see her in person for years. So when I checked her website to see if she had changed her location or prices, I was disturbed to see no updates despite lockdown, which led us to falling out, but we're still speaking, and I've resisted sending her an existential heart on Skype. And this is my final poem, Silence. Silence. The last time I carried the blue choir benches was one of the first times I felt myself in a way which made me remember that time in spring when I realised Gram was Father Christmas, and even though I loved her, she would die soon. So I stayed awake on Christmas Eve and saw Gram turn into a memory that I'll always think about when asked in therapy how it feels to sit in a silence which I used to call prayer. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Jo. It's just such a, moving pamphlet, and I'm sure that it's really hard to write these poems, and we feel like very kind of privileged to be able to be included in this. And so next, I would like to introduce to you Fawzia and Fawzia Kane. She's an architect. She works as an architect, and she's sorry, my apologies. I'll start again. Fawzia is an architect and poet. They were born in San Fernando, Trinidad and Tobago, and now live and practice in London. Their debut poetry collection, Tanti Diables, by Waterloo Press, was a finalist in the poetry section of the Boxall Lit Fest, which is a very big prize. And 2014, there's the long sequence Houses of the Dead, which came out as an illustrated pamphlet. They are now preparing the latest collection. I will let Fawzia tell you more about that. And they are also working on a long sequence dream script, Songs of Sacrats. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's Guaracara, which is the name of a river, and it's one of the relatively unusual things about Trinidad, which has such a varied colonial thing, is that a lot of our place names are the last and only legacies of the first peoples who lived there how many centuries ago and who were decimated and and erased by colonialism. Anyway, inhabitations. It's lovely to meet you, and thank you so much, Jenny. And it's an honor to be reading these other poets, which I just loved what I've heard so far. Inhabitations, I will actually start reading from some of that small pamphlet, Houses of the Dead. It's quite old, it's 2014 and probably out of print by now, but it's really based on my experience coming straight out of college and having to follow the more experienced people. And in those days, which is in a recession, all that was available, I had to it's these houses that were cleared after somebody died, but you could still see and feel, sorry, the person who lived there before. But those were the days so many years ago, so many decades ago, when a house was a home and not an investment as it is now. So somebody would be living there for virtually all their lives. So I will just start off. I will try to share. Let me know if you can't. There we go. Could you see this? Preliminaries are basically in a technical document for specification for a building, no matter how small. It could be a little extension or a big building, and it just introduces all the terms of the contract. But for us, if a preliminaries also mean other things. So look into this crowd, examine those who stand against the walls. Look for the grey men whose faces we cannot see, though they try to meet our gaze. These are the ones who huddle together yet are alone. These are the guards for our walls. They plug our roofs and shatter our windows. Listen to their crying out to warn. They plan for havoc. They dread the flood. They will watch, but will never stop the fall. They list the faults of none, yet they will blame all. They are not the ones who dream. They are not the ones who build. These men do not touch, and we can possess nothing unless they choose to whisper blessings over our heads. These men will not speak until they are paid. Their words carry the weight of our buildings, our entire cities even. They see too much of us. Our lives are read by our absences. This is a skill honed by years of tracing the inside of our masks. I have to say, this was written in 2013, 2012. It's about risk aversion in attitude in the construction industry. And we know now what that leads to, especially with Grenfell, where they list the faults of none. It's basically a surveyor walking through these empty buildings, tracking his reports on who lived there, and he's going through his own, or they are going through their own disintegration mentally from their own loss. Okay. The surveyor. Evening and torchlight expose the hidden. I remember a front room, featureless as the owners and the house itself. I stood against a corner's edge, looked towards the window. There were Venetian blinds, the glass was crazed with hairline cracks. A street lamp bled its fog yellow over the pavement, through the wooden slats. And despite air so still, among the ordinary of dust, discarded books, furniture, oh, the shapes that danced in that room, hard edge and straight, they trapped me, tried to stop me breathing. For those few seconds, I could not, did not want to move. House of Il Jinete, that's a horseman. Sorry, that was sort of something from my Mexican friends there. On entering, you'll realize that there are no windows, doors, or even a roof. There are only walls, angled at times to enclose, stopping to leave openings which bleed from room to room. The front room encloses a cloudless sky. As you move through the house, the seasons change. Birds nest in a room draped with flowering vines. Next to this, falling leaves cover the floor. In another space, the air is so hot the mortar between the bricks rub off as powder. Meanwhile, in the center, the house is flooded. The rain never stops here. And by just some sheer thing, the photographs that I took for this book, the buildings no longer exist. This is a remnant of an old plantation house that became a restaurant, sugar plantation house, and was burnt. and the forest has now reclaimed that space. The surveyor 4. We can never burst out of this cage. Dreams of bird freedom are just that, yet we bind them so tightly our bones snap. So we break our fast while she whispers through silk, threads words of our skin, blood wheels and mahogany. Now she says, watch me lick salt off a blackened moon, watch me lick poison out of the sky. Our fingers weave blankets from these lies. Will her smile always taste of apricots? I'll just stop sharing now. The next set of inhabitations I thought I would show is, well, one with inhabiting another persona. And so this one was written actually during some workshops on Milton. And it's basically when, according to Milton, God sent Raphael down to warn Adam, to have a nice little chat with Adam that you are going to have to make a choice between good and bad. Adam doesn't know what good and bad, but according to Milton, it's humankind had a warning so that when they make their free will choice, you can't say you didn't know. But this is Eve, who was in the background, who did all the work in Eden, while Raphael and Adam are having their intellectual discussion. So Eve prepares the meal. To serve him is to serve the world, or so he says. Gather the best, show the perfect harvest, is proof of love. Today I walked and walked until I saw the edges, where trees bend with fruit that glow and droop with yearning to be plucked. There I saw odd gaps between the leaves, a sort of emptiness, without the vapors of clouds even. My own breath against my face felt strange with this new unknowing. I walked on, but every time I approached, the vines closed in. I pushed deeper and they wrapped tighter and crushed what I couldn't see. Every time I moved further, some winged guard would appear from the fringes saying, nothing, no, thing to see, nothing at all, best to go back, love, go back to love. So I will sit, I will watch him sit, gesture, and speak with the things I put into his mouth. He will offer his glorious guest, and they will eat. They will sip the nectar I decanted over the past hours. The heaviest blossom are the ones still unopened. Who has time to savor their fragrance? All flowers resist the prizing apart of petals. Since the cut of my birth, I had to be careful. A bruise can release such bitter juice. I must do as he says. Sometimes I wonder if I cut myself open, spread out my flayed skin, lay the quarters of my heart before him. Will all be pleased? Am I over time now? I'm just, Jenny?
Yeah, read what you need to feel free.
Oh, okay, there's
one more.
The last one is inhabiting another poem. And this is a form that the dead, sorry. This is a form that Inua Ellams invented, I guess, or developed. I'll now show the original poem, and it's where a poem is contained within another one. Oh, yes, there we go. This is Martin Carter's famous Is This the Dark Time I Love, the Guyanese poet, I think written as a letter to his wife while he was imprisoned for being a dissident. And so basically it's the beginning and end of each line, your poem is, and what I also tried was another word within those lines to create another poem. So this one is, I wonder if you could, I'll have to stop sharing that one and hope you got a glimpse of it and share this one, which is the poem. worth trying if you haven't, because some remarkable things come out of it. This is Carnival of Small Creatures after Martin Carter. And this was written, by the way, about 4 or 5 years ago. The masks thing is just a coincidence. Carnival of Small Creatures by Martin Carter. This is the time of masks, little one. All around the streets, the naked crawl about their troughs of glitter dust until skins reflect the sky. Red lips of clowns are painted in pretend sorrow. This is the season of masks, little one. It is the bacchanalian dance, half-masked with feral tears. It is the festival of black oil, igniting fires of misery. Everywhere revelers' debts rise. May they never grow anxious. Who'll play the devil's mask this time? Whose body will lie among the razor grass? It is the scent of death, little one, that silent invader watching our words and infecting our dream. And the last one is another contained poem, but I'll have to ask your consent of reading because it's actually about a bullfight that I witnessed by unwillingly after Mahmoud Darwish. It's I was taken there by a friend, thinking by some friends who lived at the south of France, thinking it was a village football match, and I couldn't leave the bleachers. I was literally trapped in there, so had to watch it. The original poem is called The Cypress Brook by Darwish, and again the first and last lines, and I try to also keep the length of the lines there with one of the words inside. The bull fell after Mahmoud Darwish. The bull fell like a tree with red sap pouring on the earth of the arena, dark wine pooling under swags of velvet, green as sea moss that draped the brass band stage. No one got hurt. The vehicles sped behind the bleachers towards the butcher's stalls, where dust blew into tarpaulin screens that hid sawdust and knives. The bull fell, but the team of black mules tried to stand still so their harness wouldn't change its position. They nodded feathered heads and stamped hooves above the arena's wooden edge, impatient to flick the hem of Il Presidente's symbol and drag away their payload of death. A woman remembered last week's storm. She covered her head when the wind whipped up the dust again, and the bull fell, and the band continued playing well. Il Presidente said, maybe this bull deserves to be freed, to go back to fields where he could grow old with his bloodline around him, waiting their turn to enter village arenas. But few in this crowd agreed, for a matador must kill quick and clean in front of his lovers. And a boy said, I must practice passing the cape perfectly. It isn't as easy as it looks. And a girl said, after all this, perhaps today is when I will learn to face the charge, because this bull fell. And a young banderillero said, perhaps my battles are now complete because I helped to fell the bull. And I said to myself in this moment of clarity, the bull fell, sword through spine, his death was nothing at all. There was no meaning to his suffering. The bull fell. Thank you.
I can share them. Oh no.
Okay, it's here. It's just have load the poems. So can everyone see them, please?
Thanks, Jenny. Oh,
Can you see?
can you hear me? Girl was born. Girl was in the world. Her mother was a horse and her father was a pony. Or was it the other way round? Girl never knew when a day would turn sour. The world was a farmyard full of plastic animals. The houses were wooden, tiny painted rectangles for windows, nothing to look out from. Girl looked out of her rectangular eyes with longing. Girl reached for quiet. She reached for making sense. The words danced themselves up and down on the page until finally she understood them. Girl was born too late, or too early. She became a sister, then she became a sister again. She ran up the slippery stairs, 2 at a time. She jumped down them. Girl was a ratty tennis ball. Somewhere along the way, she lost her bounce. Girl was born a second time. Girl was born of the woods. Her father was a pine tree. Her mother was a bramble. The house was full of midges. There was no way of returning to where she had come from. She picked up a twig shaped like a gun and aimed it. So another form of inhabitation that's in this collection is, I think trauma has a way of really inhabiting us when we've been through something traumatic. And this poem is about that. It's about how trauma inhabits a person and then is also passed down through the generations. Crash site. We remember only vaguely now the wreckage of our mother, her damaged fuselage suspended precariously between 2 broken pine trees. How carefully one had to tread so as not to bring the whole thing down. And everywhere, the stink of aviation fuel, at least in the beginning. We never did find that black box, so it was always unclear exactly what had happened, and each survivor told a different story. But the wreckage was there for all to see. Seats and belongings scattered far and wide, things broken open, life jackets snagged on jagged branches. Though our mother's windows had popped out with the pressure, she sometimes talked affectionately about the plummet, but swore she could remember nothing before takeoff, of our other life before takeoff. Our first memory was the screaming of metal and the silence which came after. So now I'm going to read a poem about a very different sort of inhabitation, which is a haunting, or in this case, a not haunting. My mum always was a clairvoyant, and she always jokingly said she would come back and haunt me when she died, and I'm still waiting 10 years later. Clairvoyance. 1. Oh mother, where is the promised haunting? It is too late now to believe in the afterlife unless you make a late and unexpected appearance. Think shadow on the stairs, apparition at the end of the bed. Ectoplasm might be mistaken for slug trails in the living room and shorting of the lights for faulty wiring. But if you speak my name in the darkness, I will be all ears. All these deaths and not one ghostly materialization. I rarely see any of you now, even in dreams. 2. The other world is a clutch of mice that someone killed with a spade, a baby blackbird pushed from the nest by a cuckoo and splattered on the pavement. The world is as brutal as we make it. Imagine the hottest day of the year. You are on a train and the air conditioning is broken. On the table next to yours, a woman is fanning her friends. Imagine your mother waiting at the station like she never did. her eagerness to take you shopping or to a cafe. 3. The other world is through this thin meniscus. Push your hand through and touch it. Everything there is better or worse than here, depending on your perspective. Over there, you might be living with your lover, who in this world is dead, and he might not be a serial cheater. Your brother might be a lawyer and your mother a doctor. The blackbird might rise up undead and fly back to the nest. You assure your father there will be no homecoming, though he tells you he has made you up a bed in the room with the squalling crows in the chimney. You don't want to offend him, but that room burns you up with its morning heat and its glowing window. And at 5 a.m, the crows start laughing at you down the chimney, and you wish you had a gun, knowing that it's irrational and useless. The chimney, after all, is boarded up. Boarded up like your heart has been all these years, and the hearts of your father, your sister, like boarded up shops, your family, no real business to be had. When you think about your father's spare room, you remember how uncomfortable the mattress is, all buttons. How that last Christmas you spent there, you woke up black and blue. So a place that are all familiar with is the family home, and how families inhabit their homes. Both, you know, physically and emotionally. So this is about dysfunctional family. All that water. The house a floodplain, though we didn't know it. Beds washing around their rooms at night like boats broken from their moorings. The only light a soft orange bleed through too thin curtains. As we drifted off, we could hear our parents downstairs, neither of them swimmers, struggling to keep their heads above water, the garbled voices of underwater TV. When Nanny H arrived, suddenly everything felt calm and safe. She brought life buoys and flares. She tucked us into bed at night wearing orange life jackets. And yet, beneath her calm surface was a deeper water, a vortex that led to the underworld. And when she thought we were ready, she would casually toss us down. Now to a different type of inhabitation. I think grief and loss is something that really inhabits us, and once it's there, it never fully goes away again. You know, there's quite a lot of loss in this book: loss of love, loss of a parent, and loss of a partner, and this next poem is about the year following the loss of a partner. That year, there was a hurricane inside me. I was all arms and legs and panic, and no one could stop my river bursting its banks. Things were getting smashed up and I was powerless to stop it. No one had explained to me what to do when the big winds came. First, the tiles lifted clean off the roof and dumped themselves at my feet. And then the rain arrived, lashing and ferocious, soaking the bed linen. That year, Nothing much made sense, and I made a storm shelter of myself, so that when the flood warnings sounded, I didn't hear them. I lay curled on my camp bed, oblivious, until the shelter began slowly filling up. But of course, after loss, eventually comes some sort of renewal. And, you know, in my case, I moved on and found a new partner. And this is kind of about that, but it's also about how place can inhabit you as well. And yeah, the father of my child was from near Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is somewhere that I felt really inhabited me because I spent quite a lot of time there. And then I married Scotland, though I hadn't been far over the border yet, only as far as the soft places. But you see, I had once spent a day and a night in a crofter's cottage, writing a story about death, avoiding the midges, only the kids of our hosts daring to venture outside, though it was the height of summer. They dressed up in beekeepers' suits and veiled hats for protection, and off they went with their badminton rackets. It wasn't that, or the shadows of the clouds moving swiftly across the hillsides, not even the bridge in the middle of a beach that did it, but some more urban thing. The city's stone steps calling to those concrete ones that live inside me. Its twists and turns, unders and overs and blind alleys. Perhaps it wasn't Scotland I married, but that city, the way it understood me. No comment, just a bluster of rain and the crowd jostling me off the pavement. The bridge in that poem, the bridge in the middle of the beach, is called the Bridge to Nowhere, and it's on Dunbar Beach. You can look it up. It really just is a bridge in the middle of a beach. Okay, I'm going to read my last poem now, which is kind of about resurrection, really. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the inspiring readers from all the other readers tonight. Amazing poems. I feel really privileged. Remaking Mother. I am making her from wire and string. I am using anything I can find in the house. I am incanting her name as I cut and shape and glue. I am singing her back to life. Her eyes are buttons. Her hair is string and strips of polystyrene. Her mouth is a plastic milk bottle lid, red as a late summer rose. She hefts herself up out of the junk and walks towards me. I keep on chanting, keep on singing. She holds her hands out, pleading. Her arms are lolly sticks and her hands are corks. Her fingers, pearly-headed pins. Her body is a pizza cut from a box lid. Her legs are toilet roll tubes, and her feet are large round pebbles from the garden. She shuffles towards me, and I can't look away. I sing her name out, Carol, Carol. The sunlight moves across the window and lights up her face. Thank you very much.
Of the thousands that we take now that we have digital ones, but when you change them to grayscale and make them black and white and upgrade, and I boosted the contrast, it's basically playing with digital work rather than the old. I mean, we used to burn in the old days with 35mm, so that image just became more and more abstract rather than a particular place and a particular thing. And the publisher made the decision, and I agreed, not to have them linked to any particular piece so that we wouldn't think the poem related to that. But they do. It's like as you Hitsu's, or the ordering of your poems in your collection, they start bleeding meaning into each other based on how the ordering is. So that was one aspect. And in terms of artwork of other people's, I write based on the feeling that that artwork provokes rather than what the thing is itself. Because art works when there's a personal response that sometimes and more often, and maybe especially, has nothing to do with what the artist intended for themselves when they were creating it. And I think that also works with a poem. If the poem provokes some internal memory or feeling for that particular reader, and it has nothing to do with what the poet wrote about in the first place, for what inspired them, for want of a better word, then I think that poem works, because then it becomes something universal. So that was my response, if that helps a bit. Hello, Sue, by the way.
Penny, Joe.
I think for me, artworks which don't feature words are they feel like an invitation to look at that form, whatever it might be, and respond to it in words in a particular form. So it's sort of about shaping the experience of that artwork through words, which is just a different way of shaping, I guess.
I was just thinking about your question, Sue, as well, and yeah, I think it's really interesting. So when I think about the poems which I've written, as I said in my introduction, I think some of them I certainly only wrote because I'd painted a picture, and then others I painted a picture following the fact that I'd written it. I said that in a really convoluted way, but I was just thinking specifically about tissue box. So the amount of therapy rooms I've drawn over the past few, couple of years, I've certainly drawn a lot of therapy rooms, and I've always, nearly always, I paint tissue boxes in them as well. So yeah. So I don't know if that helps, but I think very visually. So I think it's fair to say for every single poem I have, I've either painted a picture for it or I'm planning to. So that's how I kind of think about art. And I'm certainly incredibly inspired by art. I mean, I mentioned Hockney in there, but Tracy Emin is an artist who I really love, and her use of words in her art as well. Yeah, I really love it when poetry comes into visual art.
I think I'm quite inspired by the same kind of artists as you are, I think, Joe. But I think I tend to write less poems that are inspired by art, but I think that art kind of just feeds into the subconscious somehow, in the same way as like reading poems does as well. And there's quite a few poems in my collection that are inspired by either collections by other poets, like specifically A Bit by Victoria Chan, and that poem that year, There Was a Hurricane Inside Me, I think was inspired by Kim Moore. Maybe I sort of hear the echoes of Kim Moore when I read it sometimes. But to go back to what you said about the cover of the book that actually my son did came later, and what's really great about that is that sometimes people can read your work and they see something in it. And what he did, he kind of listened, he read the book and then he listened to what I said about it, and then he just came back with this image that was much better than anything I ever imagined. And that's really great to see a visual response to your work. It's really Yeah, it's amazing actually.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's just so inspiring to hear how all of you kind of respond to all your favorite ways to connect with art. I have Rachel has another question, I believe.
Yes, I do. I just want to comment also that I think, Julie, music is a big part of your creativity as well, listening to music. And I know that's common for a lot of artists as well as writers. The question I wanted to ask is, Fawzia, I didn't quite understand when you talked about this form with a poem within a poem. Can you say a bit more about that, please? I think there's several of us would like to know.
I will. It's a form. Inua Ellams had been commissioned, and I think he called it After Hours. Hashtag After Hours was the name of the collection, and they were all based on existing poems by other poets. I think he was given that. And he wrote it after hours, basically, I presume. I was going to ask him before this reading whether he had a name, because I call it the After Hours form. And I will ask him more about it, and maybe he could tweet about it, and then you could see it then. But it's basically not so much Golden Shovel, which I think is another one that uses the end words, or acrostic, which is using letters. But it's contained within that. So you have the line and you have the some people just use the end of the word, but I like the beginning and the end of the sentence. It's a challenge, but you could actually, you could surprise yourself by what comes out of it. And you obviously say after whoever the original, even though the poem may end, the poem you end up with has nothing to do in a way with the original. So I showed Martin Carter's as an example. I don't know how to share more than one thing on the screen for it. Does it have that?
I'm not totally sure. Give it a try.
We don't seem to have that on this thing. I think there must have been
things actually true or not. If it sparks something, I want to just pursue that and kind of see where it takes me. So it's like, you know, what I said at the beginning of Williams Who Lived. I really don't mind whether that tale of the three men each being called Hugh Williams is true. I want it to be true enough for the poem, which, yeah, I wouldn't get away with in a museum context, but I think in poetry is allowed. I hope it is.
That's truer than life. Anyone else, or any comments, or but I know that it's actually getting late, so I wanted to also ask if the poets, Fawzia, did you wanted to add something, or sorry, I can't hear you.
One of the things you asked us was to think of a couple of books to recommend. Yes. So, but I'd like to ask the other poets, were there any direct other writers who provoked some of the poems? And I say provoke rather than inspired, the poems that you read today.
Well, I think I already mentioned Victoria Chang's a bit, which I don't think I actually read the poem in my collection that's directly inspired by her, but that collection has definitely inspired me in general. But also Kim Moore and Caroline Bird. But yeah, I mean, there's probably too many to mention, really.
The rhythm of Baby Cage was perhaps slightly improbably lifted from Subterranean Homesick Blues. So I just wanted to write something with that. that kind of driving beat, but it's nothing to do with the content of the poem.
Also, it's strange because the way we separate out the different disciplines, where life isn't like that at all. Although I have to admit, I separate out being a poet from being an architect. I mean, it's just a tiny practice that we've got here, so I could, but even for my partner, he's not interested, and you know, so it's it's only recently that you know, the two have been blending, because you can't separate out those, you know, in a way, if you honor, I keep saying, if you honor your creative life, you honor all the aspects of that. Yeah. Joe, was there anybody who inspired you with your writing, even the form or rhythm, or it doesn't even have to be a writer, as Penny?
No, thanks for the question. So I think, well, funny enough, I've actually written a golden shovel in my collection. Sorry, not my collection, my pamphlet. So I really do love form. So I've got a golden shovel. I like writing. I don't know the name for this form.
And it's amazing, both the translation or obviously the original. It's Funso Ayegina is Nigerian, from Nigeria, but has lived in the Caribbean for most of his life and is retired there. He's a professor. His book is out, but it's absolutely amazing poems. And there's one called Kiss and Quarrel and Whispers. And it's just one day, if we have a reading or something, but that's something, if you ever see this and get that amazing work out. Vani Capildeos, which is, I had her, I walk with it in the, to read in the tube, which is Dusty Angel, this little pamphlet, £5 from Oystercatcher. And written in lockdown, because she went to visit her mother, and in lockdown in Trinidad in 2020 was announced. So she was stranded there for some months, having to find a convoluted way back to Scotland. But from that, those poems are now incorporated into this, which is just out.
I love that book.
Amazing work.
That one's really good.
Yes, and lastly, because it's in Habitations, and there is an unbuilt building that is based on Dante, called the Danteum, by an architect called Giuseppe Tirani, and 1938, and he joined Mussolini's group, thinking, this is a new future and so on, and then after a few years started realizing what he joined, and it's an open secret that he actually committed suicide because he just couldn't cope with what it is. But his design for the Danteum is amazing, because it's a poem, it's a building of a poem. So there's a reprint now of Thesis, which breaks it down. It's really easy to read also. Talks about the poem, talks about the work and the development of it. And it's called Tirani's Danteum by Thomas Schumacher. And because it's a reprint now and thing, it's affordable rather than the big hardback one that was, you know, really expensive. So that's an interesting thing if you are interested in a building inhabiting a person so much, because he has, one of the things also is a hall of glass columns, which in those days would have been an impossible thing to build, although perhaps not so now. And so you walk through the building, which is the different parts of the poem in the different things. So it's in a way an enforced route from the beginning out to the end, or whether you're trapped inside. Now on YouTube, you can get any amount of architectural students who would have built it as CAD, where you could literally walk through, you know, but when this was done in 1980 or something, it was thick. So that's my little bit of recommendations for you.
Thanks very much, Fawzia. And yours sort of, or do you have anything to add before Penny? Do you have?
in the process of moving house, so I can't put my hands on some of my recommendations, but one book I really recommend is Abigail Parry's Jinx, which I think is a really exciting, playful collection. Books by Theophilus Queck, I think, are very interesting, looking at transnationalism, and I think he's got a really beautiful way with images. And the book I can put my hands on is Phoebe Power's new book, Book of Days, which I find a really kind of mesmerizing read. It's once you sort of start to get inside the world, it's about the pilgrimage walk, the Santiago de Compostela walk. Yeah, once you get inside this world, it's hard to come out again. So you sort of have to read it at one gulp. So that's sort of about inhabitations of landscape, and Polly Atkins' Much with Body as well, I think is a really powerful collection. But yeah, constantly finding new favorites.
Thank you so much. Well, that looks like a really
reading this, which is called Why I Write Poetry, which is like little essays about people's personal journeys with writing poetry. It's edited by Ian Humphreys and published by Nine Arches. And I bought it just out of interest, and I've enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. And it's got little exercises at the end of each chapter as well. But yeah, other things I've really enjoyed recently, I took them upstairs earlier. Tanya Hirschman's new collection. I can't remember what it's called. It's got octopus in the title, and it's got a really brilliant picture of an octopus on the cover. But I'd highly recommend that, and this one as well, Ephemeron by Fiona Benson, which just came out recently as well.